I'm Eric R. Christoph of Hover and Smile. It's the topic so nice, I'm filming it twice, but not with the Spectrum DX6. This time, the Spectrum DX7 transmitter, dual rates, and exponential.
It's upside down.
The box is upside down? Dual rates and exponential. Programming your DX7 for dual rate and exponential isn't too far off of the DX6. The biggest differences are the switches. Based on the DX7 model you have, if it's a helicopter and airplane, you may not have the switch that they show on the front of the box or the actual manual. I don't. What that does is basically moves that tri-state flap switch into your stunt mode switch for your helicopter model. So either way, you'll still be able to configure one switch to change all your dual rates for all three channels at once. You can still use the individual switches for your rudder, aileron, and elevator, but if you want the three-stage switch, you can use that to change between two sets of dual rates. Based on the model memory type that you're using, be it helicopter or airplane, the configuration of those switches is different. With the DX6, it was pretty much the same, but with the 7, it is a bit different. So let's go over that into detail with both the E-flite 4-Sight airplane and the Blade MSR helicopter. All right, we've got our Spectrum DX7. Let's go ahead and look at a helicopter profile for setup. Before we actually go into the model memory, I do want to go over a difference between the helicopter version of the Spectrum DX7 and the aircraft. Instead of a triple state rocker switch up here, where I now have a gear switch, the helicopter version has a triple state switch here in the upper left for flight mode. On the aircraft version, that's reversed. The gear switch is a dual switch here, and this switch is your triple state switch. So just make sure that you note the difference there. As far as my helicopter version of this switch, this stunt mode, at the bottom it's in normal, in the middle it's in mode 1, and at the top it's in mode or position 2. So just something to keep in mind. Now let's go ahead and look at the model memory profile. You can see I've got a helicopter set up here, it's the Blade MSR. To change whether or not I want one switch, this switch here, to rule all my channels, I want to go into Select and Up and select Auto Dual Rate. Let's go ahead and select that menu option. By default, this is all inhibited, meaning nothing's going on here. It's all individual channel work. However, I've got it set up to where, based on the position of this switch, this tri-state rocker switch, the upper left, the stunt mode or flight mode switch, it will choose between my two sets of rates. You'll see that I've got inhibited here on normal. What this means is that that switch, when it's in the normal position, my dual rates are individually selected by the channel switches. If I flick it into the middle position, that means that I'm going to use my low rate, which is P0. If I flick the tri-state rocker into the high position, so I'm in the topmost position for my stunt mode switch, I will use my high rate. So that's how you select that in this menu. If you don't want to use one switch, then you set everyone to inhibited. But if you do want to use one switch, based on what your mode is, you can set it to whatever rate you want. This maps basically the switch position to the rate. All right, let's go ahead then and look at dual rates for the MSR. So I'll hit Select and Up, go to the Dual Rate and Exponential button. Now, you can see a really nice graph here showing full servo travel. This is basically with the stick at the center position, and this is how far the servo will go when the stick is all the way to the extreme end. You can choose which channel you're modifying by just simply having your arrow here and hitting increase and decrease. So let's start off with the aileron. Now, since I'm in position 0, this is for my low rate, and since my rocker switch on that auto dual rate function, we set that to inhibited, that means it's not going to do anything. I have to actually use my individual channel switches to change my rate. So if I'm on position 0 and aileron, I flick the aileron switch, and you can see I switch to position 1, which is now my high rate. Back to 0, now high, now back to low. Same thing for my rudder and elevator. So if I flick elevator, I'm now in my high rate, and now I'm in my low rate. Let's take a look then and say I take that triple state rocker and switch it to flight mode 1, which is the middle position. You'll see this term auto come up. Now that means that one switch is changing all the rates for my individual channels. And since I'm on elevator, I'll show you that now that it's on auto, that elevator switch does nothing. It doesn't change my rates in any way, shape, or form. I am stuck in low rate for all 3 channels. When I flip this switch up to high, I'm now in the high rate for all 3 channels. Low, and high. Auto means that that one switch controls all 3 channels. If I flick back to normal, I'm now in my individual switch mode to go from low to high rate. That's completely up to you. By using that auto dual rate function in the menu, you can switch whether or not this triple state, your flight mode or your stunt mode switch, controls all rates at once, or if you still want to use individual channels for no matter what mode you're in. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually look at changing the dual rates. Say we'll go ahead and give our elevator and aileron down to 60%, and we'll give them a little bit of Expo. So you'll simply just hit select to scroll down. We're going to give them 35% Expo. Watch what happens to this line here. It's going to take that exponential curve, and remember I'm on spectrum, so I want to use positive Expo to numb it around the center of the stick. You can see that exponential curve that we've talked about before starting to happen here in this graph. Now, if I combine that with the dual rate and I lower this to, say, 60%, you can see that line is still curved, but it's also decreasing, meaning that my servo isn't going to move as far as it did before. And I'm in position 0, so this is all for my low rate. I'll go ahead and set my elevator to the same. We'll set it to 35, and set the dual rate to 60. And we will go ahead and set the rudder to just a simple 60 without Expo. So you can see that that line's very straight. Now, once again, I can flick, since I don't have auto on here and I'm position 0, I have to change by flicking the rudder switch specifically up and down. You can see how I'm changing between my low rate and my high rate. But if I want to control all 3, I simply flick my rocker switch, my flight mode, into the middle. I'm now on low rate for all the channels. If I flick it up high, I'm now on high rate for all my channels. So that's how you set a helicopter's dual rate and exponential, and with the choice of using that triple state rocker switch to control all 3 channels dual rates at once. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at an airplane setup and how that differs. You can't choose a common switch for all your dual rates in an airplane model memory setup without actually going into your system menu, and you get into that by first turning your transmitter on and holding some keys down. So that's the first difference between the aircraft and the helicopter. Plus, you don't really get a choice of whether or not you want to use this middle position of your triple state rocker. Your choices are really quite limited in that sense. However, you do get some extra choices by being able to use your individual channels as that one end-all be-all switch. So to access that system menu, I actually have to shut my transmitter down, hold select and down at the same time, turning it on. Model select, we're at our combat flyer. That's my airplane, so we're going to go ahead and hit select and up, which chooses the system list menu. There is finally an option for dual rate switches. You don't get that option if you're in a helicopter model memory profile. Simply select that, and you'll see that right now I'm on individual. No matter what, the specific switches for each channel will control that specific channel's dual rate. The other options here are flap 0 and flap 2. What that means is if you have a flap switch, it's up here. Otherwise, on my helicopter, it's this rocker here. This switch chooses this option chooses which position your switch will be for your high rate. So this can get a little confusing. If I'm on flap 0, that actually means normal mode on my stunt flight switch, and that will be the high rate. Middle and up will be low rates. If I select flap 2, then that means low normal mode, and position 1 will be low rate, and high will be the high rate. So just make note of that. It's a very easy thing to miss. Once again, flaps will choose which position your high rate will be selected with. So flap 0 corresponds to normal mode, flap 1, which doesn't actually exist here, corresponds to my middle switch, and flap 2 corresponds to stunt mode 2 on my switch. I also have the option here too of choosing common aileron, elevator, and rudder, meaning I could say that the elevator switch will change all my dual rates at once, or the elevator or aileron switch. Or I can leave them all as individual. meaning the triple state rocker switch, my stunt mode switch, means nothing in terms of changing dual rates. So that's a key difference between how you set the actual dual rates from a helicopter to an airplane. In the airplane version, we actually have to go into the system menu and set that switch. But in the helicopter version, I can do it from the actual configuration menu after I've already gone into my model memory. I'm Eric R. Christoph of Hover and Smile. I hope this Spectrum DX7 covering of exponential and dual rates has been helpful for you. For more information, please see our series at hoverandsmile.com/tx. Thanks for watching.